Hello, and welcome to episode 99 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. We're here today with Ike Leggett, Montgomery County Executive. Ike, how are you doing today?
Doing very well, and thank you for having me on the program.
Excellent. The first question I'd like to ask you is, what are you currently doing, or what have you ever done to advance the public interest, and why?
Well, currently I'm looking at the FY 2018 county capital improvements budget, which I have to submit by January the 15th. This is a budget that determines all of the major facilities in Montgomery County, from roads, transportation, the environmental facilities that we have, fire station, police stations, schools. It's a fairly complicated and huge endeavor. This is in our public's interest, and clearly one that we have to get right because it determines a great deal of things in Montgomery County, whether they have school facilities that meets the needs of our growing population of about 2,000 students per year.
Now, you've handled a capital budget in Montgomery County for almost 28 years. Is that correct, as both a member of the Montgomery County Council and as a county executive?
That's correct.
So how have the needs of Montgomery County evolved over the course of almost 3 decades, and how has your approach to improving capital projects in Montgomery County change, especially when you consider the different roles that you've had in the county council and now as an executive?
Well, there are some things that are similar. For example, education continues to be a top priority. When I first came on the council in 1986, we had a large number of school needs at that point in time, increased population, increased school needs, and that continues to this day. Things that have in fact changed are in fact that we have a large amount of issues associated with environmental factors, where we are building more stormwater management facilities because the environment of the last 20 years certainly has significantly been a part of the ongoing debate as it relates to public facilities. And so you would see the county invested in large numbers of environmental sensitive items that helps to improve the environment. So that's an area that has changed.
So on the topic of environmental policy with capital improvement budget, would you say that there are more environmental needs that are more pressing now, or would you say that kind of in general society has placed a greater emphasis and has prioritized environmental concerns, which were just as present when you first entered elected office, but it's just that the constituency that you represent of 1 million people now demands more?
I think it's much more sensitivity and prioritization. Clearly, the environment had challenges prior to the time that I arrived and when I first got here. But what has happened is that we have become much more aware, much more sensitive to the environmental challenges, and therefore, as a result of the fragile nature of the environment today and what we now know that we didn't know 25, 30 years ago, we are paying more attention to that. And as a result, we spend more in terms of investment of taxpayers' dollars into environmental issues.
Can you speak for a moment about a concrete example about what an environmental impact might have on the capital improvement budget?
For example, if you look at the vehicles that we use, they are vehicles that have a great deal of environmental sensitivity. They are vehicles that do not use the typical type of gasoline, and so we buy a fleet of vehicles that are utilized, or at least have our contractors. That costs additional amounts of money.
So county-owned vehicles are now hybrid vehicles?
Hybrid vehicles, right.
Okay.
When you look, for example, at the roofs on many of the county buildings, we are providing the kind of installation that will take advantage of solar technology, for example.
Sure.
If you look at the investment that we have, just for example, in tree planting, we are planting 4 more trees today than we planted in the past. If you look at our stormwater management facilities, they are better. There are more of them. And we are investing more in stream reparations than we've had in the past. So those are just a few of the things that we invest in and trying to meet the requirements that we did not invest in at the same level, say, 25, 30 years ago.
So as you speak of evolving environmental needs and priorities within Montgomery County, I'd like to shift a little bit to talk for a moment about the evolving demographics of Montgomery County. Now, you were born in Texas, you went to college in Louisiana, and now you represent 1 million individuals living in Montgomery County. Can you talk about your constituency, what makes them special, how you address their needs, how your background has informed that. Just a little bit about what brought you here and how you serve your constituents.
Well, I actually lived for the most of my formative years in Louisiana, so I was actually born in Texas right across the border because it was the only place there was a clinic near the home in Louisiana, but I never lived actually in Texas at all.
Okay.
But I grew up in a time where we had a great deal of segregation, Jim Crow, and went to segregated schools. I got involved in the civil rights struggle, met people like Dr. King when I was a college student.
How did that opportunity come to pass?
Well, I was attending a conference and working in Tennessee, and he attended a conference in Alexandria, Louisiana, and I had an opportunity to meet him. As part of that, it was a very exciting opportunity. I was one of many students sitting out in the audience of about 600 or 700 people. At the time, I thought he was only talking to me, but he was really talking to the entire audience. And I was motivated by that. I became very active in the civil rights struggle in the 60s.
How so?
Of the demonstrations and the picketing,
Yeah.
the boycotts. I was a student leader. I was the president of the student government, as you may recall. A large amount of the protest was actually led by students, and I was one of the many students actively engaged in that process.
And where were you a student at the time?
Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Okay, and so there was a conference, and it was a student conference that you went to.
No, there was a conference of teachers in Alexandria, Louisiana, and I had a chance to go there because he was speaking.
Okay.
And I was actually working in North Carolina,
Right.
Right outside of Asheville, North Carolina, and he came to speak at one of the retreats there nearby, and I had an opportunity to meet him there.
Well, the year now is 2017, so some time has passed since the civil rights movement. But yet it's in the news, right? Sometimes the media presents certain issues that were addressed in the mid-'60s as recurring or being challenged today. Would you say there are, how would you say that the civil rights movement remains relevant for your constituency and for you today?
Well, many of the fights, many of the battles that we thought were totally behind us, apparently are not. We see great divisions within our country. They continue to take the form of racism. They continue to take the form of many other challenges that we see. We assume that much of that was behind us. But I think what we've seen over the last year, given the divisions that are in our country, that there's still a great deal of frustration, great deal of challenges and hatred and insensitivity that exist within our community. Oftentimes they are hidden, but I think in the last year we've seen a lot of that come out to the forefront. Whether you're talking about issues of immigration, whether you're talking about outright bigotry, in all forms, we've seen it in the last year. It's really a sad commentary, especially given the fact that we've worked so hard over so many years, assuming that we put much of this behind us. And so we've seen reoccurrences of those acts of hatred throughout our community and around this nation that I assume, and many people assume, were no longer part of the American history.
So there's been an uptick in hate crimes in Montgomery County.
Yes, but in Montgomery County, we are probably still an exception compared to much of the country as a whole. What we look at in Montgomery County has been an uptick, but by comparison, you look at other parts of the country, it would be relatively mild compared to what we see in other portions of the country.
Are you doing anything to protect civil liberties in Montgomery County?
Yes, we've always had. We've had a very strong civil rights office in Montgomery County. We try to make certain that our police, our school system are working to prevent acts of violence, to prevent acts of hatred, but to try to inform people about what the law happens to be. But you can't rely solely on the law because you can never totally legislate out hatred. You can't punish those who hate and those who break the law. But the best way in which to address that is to become much more involved in educating people, to inform people about what is right and what is wrong, so you preclude the acts of hatred to begin before they actually begin.
Have you supported programs to that end as county executive?
Oh, I certainly have. And if you go back and look traditionally over Montgomery County's history, you'll see a large number of civil rights related initiatives that I've taken, from housing to public accommodation, right across the board over the last 25 or 30 years. In addition to that, I came to Montgomery County in terms of public service. The first act of public service that I had in Montgomery County was a member of the county's Civil Rights, Human Rights Commission, and I chaired that commission for a number of years, going back in the late 70s.
So Martin Luther King, for many of our listeners, is a historical figure. There's a holiday coming up in January that supports Martin Luther King. Many millennials, younger generations, were not alive when he was around, and many individuals who were around never had an opportunity to meet Martin Luther King. You had an opportunity to meet him, and you were inspired by him, it sounds like. Can you talk a little bit about how his vision or his leadership inspired your vision of leadership over the course of your career, and how that echoes through today, if it does?
Well, first of all, it was a little bit comical when I first met him, because he has this booming voice. He's a very articulate person. He just captures the room.
Right.
And we've seen and heard that voice on television. But when I saw him for the very first time, I didn't realize he was so short. He was a very short person. I saw him and I said, "Is that him?" I can't, it was difficult putting my head around the fact that you hear this great voice and you have this imagination of a very towering figure, but he was relatively short. And I was puzzled at one point, saying, well, maybe that's not him. And so it actually was him. But the idea is that he talked about the betterment of the country and how we can all make a difference and how each individual person can make a contribution for the country, for our nation, for people. And when you listen to all of his messages, the consistency about it. He never talks about himself personally in terms of him and all the things that he's achieved. There's a very strong speech that he gives about the drum major, where he actually plays down his role. But if he was to be a drum major, it is for the kinds of things that he believes in. That is to help lead this parade. But this parade is followed by a large mass of people in this army, in this band that gets out to fight for those things that he believes in. So, in many ways, he brought us together to fight for those things that are the betterment of all humankind and also for our nation as a whole. And when you hear him, especially in person, and one of the things you have to keep in mind, that at that point in time, back in the 60s, we didn't have all of the sophisticated technology that we have today, where you could take a person's voice and amplify it and make it sound like it's a voice from God or something. You didn't have all of that. This was simple microphones, and sometimes speaking without a microphone.
Right.
And so when you hear those speeches, you have to think about, boy, look how strong and how articulate he is, and oftentimes speaking without notes. A person with such a command without all the sophisticated technology. That's only something we've heard and seen in the last few years.
So one thing that comes across when you describe Dr. Martin Luther King is you describe how he didn't speak about himself and he didn't play up himself. It sounds as though you're conveying to me your impression that he was a humble man. Now, he was never an elected official. He was a national leader. He was a preacher, but he was never elected. Now, you are an elected official. You spent a good portion of your life elected official. And when you've campaigned for office, as every politician must do, you've had to make the case to voters that you were the better candidate than your opposition. And in so doing, you had to enumerate your achievements and qualifications to convince voters that they should cast their trust with you. So it's interesting. How do you juxtapose Martin Luther King's leadership without ever having had to trump up his own merits versus how did you balance that against the needs of a politician? Why did you go into politics? Why not be a preacher or an unelected leader in society?
Believe it or not, I never thought of going into politics. I always thought of myself as a community activist, a person helping and supporting people from the background.
Why wouldn't you think?
The reason why is because I was a person much more the intellectual person, writing the position paper and helping others. I formed an organization in Montgomery County called SURGE, which is an organization designed to help this county to elect people of color. Not for me as running as a candidate. And I was out trying to solicit people to run, minority people within Montgomery County to run for office. But given that the numbers were so overwhelming and no one had ever actually been successful in this, people were reluctant to do so. So at the end of that process, people came to me and said, "You're the ideal person that should run," rather than solicit other people to run. You should do it. And I did it because I couldn't get others to do it, and I thought it was worthwhile to do it. And because the county was so, at least I believe, polarized, never had elected an elected official of any significant portion in Montgomery County political position. When I first ran, there was no photograph of Ike Leggett on literature. It was everything about my position, everything about my qualifications.
Do you think voters knew you were African American?
If you didn't read if you read the material carefully enough, you could figure it out. But if you didn't,
so you weren't broadcasting that?
No,
that wasn't an asset.
No, what I was trying.
But it is nowadays
to some degree. But what I was trying to do was to convince people that this person, on the merits, on achievements, on positional issues, was the right person to run for the office. And then later, after we'd gotten people familiar with, this is Ike Leggett, experience or exceptional, here's the person that you've been looking at for all this time.
Did you get any reactions of surprise from voters?
No, we may have overplayed it and maybe become too cautious about it, but we won overwhelmingly. And what we were trying to do was desensitize the question of race and go to qualification, experience, position on issues, talk about that first. But the moment you put the photograph up there, you would immediately go to that before you start to look at the other essential elements of background and qualification. We wanted to reverse that.
How have you tried to embody that spirit of humility that Martin Luther King gave to you, that you perceive from him?
Well, if you look at how I've conducted myself, I've never been one who would boast about achievements. I've never been one who would try to get credit. I'm always trying to make sure that others do.
How do you get elected?
Because I'll tell the truth to people. I was experienced as the best person for the job. If you look at my background and experience and you measure those characteristics, I think you would find very easily that in many places, in many things that I've run for, that was true.
So you mentioned a moment ago that you didn't feel like you were naturally born to be a politician. You didn't expect you would become one.
No.
And I imagine in the course of your life you have run across individuals who have felt as though they were natural politicians and always want to be one, correct?
Yes.
So, and you said you were a policy person who you envisioned originally being a supportive figure. So can you talk a little bit about what it's been like to be in office as, with your personality and your strengths as a policy person, and how your leadership style has differed from those who have thought that elected office was their calling and that's where they meant to be?
Well, two things.
Okay.
One, person running for office, in order to be successful, two things you need. The person's ability to run to campaign for office. And then secondly, the person's ability to serve once in office. They're not the same. There are an awful lot of people who are out there, if they were actually in position of an office, they would do a wonderful job. But they do not have the ability to go out to campaign, to meet people, to ask for money, to kiss the babies, and to do all the things that politicians in many ways do. There are some people who are good at the latter. They are good at campaigning. But once in office, they're not as effective. You have to combine both of those. Can I successfully campaign for the office? And once in office, can I successfully manage that office and provide the kind of leadership that people want? And we confuse the two at some point in time, and they're distinctly different.
Campaigning and governing.
That's right. I've seen some very good governance folk who never run for office, and people who run for office who should not be in office because they had the ability to run for office but not possibly serve. And it also depends on what office you're running for. For example, there are offices for which I probably would not be as effective.
Why would that be?
Because it requires a different skill set. It requires the kind of positioning of issues, the kinds of things that you'd have to compromise on so much. I seldom have I compromised on stuff. I've been as honest and open. I've engaged people very clearly. You don't have to guess about what's on my mind. I'm not an ambitious person. If you look at my background experience and you compare that to almost anyone, you say, well, why did this guy run for X, Y, and Z? I never had that intent. I was a reluctant person to even run for the county council. I ran for county executive because I thought it was the right time and the right place to be in this particular job. And so I looked very clearly at not all politics, but what it is that I could bring to a particular job and to help and to serve.
The idea of ambition is very interesting. You say that you never had the ambition to do too much, yet you are in an exalted station that many have spent a lot of money, time, and resources to try to get to and have failed. So what is it, if you're not ambitious, that led to you being elected in competitive races?
By simply doing the very best job you can at the job that you're currently in. That is the best resume for any other thing that you want to do. Oftentimes people enter politics and they've got in their mind a step ladder of successes of where they want to go. I'm going to run for council because in 5 years I want to run for county executive, and then after that I'm going to run for Congress, and then after that I'm going to run for governor. It's already planned out in their minds and so forth, what they want to do. I never approached it that way. I said, here's something that I can do, and I'm going to do the very best that I can, and let the future take care of itself. And then at that point in time, I said, okay, maybe I should do this because there's a need, or I can be successful in helping others in this particular position. But I've never had the ambition, that I've seen so many people, that they've got a roadmap planned out from the first time they go out and drop a piece of literature. They know precisely what they're going to do, how long it's going to take them to run for every office.
And how many of those people succeed in those plans?
Very few. And I think, again, because...
So it's a mistake.
I think it is. I think you should just simply do the very best you can.
Focus on being the Howard University law professor.
That's right. Focus on being a very good council member. A very good council member of whatever elected position it may be helpful for anything that you might do in the future. But you don't go in with this planned level of succession that you're going to follow.
What's the proper motivation to seek elected office?
To do the very best that you can for the people that you serve.
Which you can do, obviously, on huge national levels, as Martin Luther King did without ever being elected.
That's correct.
So why ever run for elected office when there's so many opportunities that are less competitive?
But look at what the downside would be if people took the position that I should not run for politics either because there's something inherently wrong with it, or there's something better that I can do somewhere else that may provide me with the kind of career success that I want. If you did that, then you'll leave the grounds or the field for the people who are elected, who are probably less qualified and are not going to serve the public's interest. You need to have qualified people who look at this job solely because that job helps to serve people. And there are some people who can be very good at that, and there are some people who could be very good at other kinds of jobs. The example you gave about Dr. King, I'm not sure that Dr. King could have successfully actually run for a political office. That's not to take anything away from him.
But he might not have been governor of Alabama.
That's right. His skill set and what you had to do potentially to serve in that capacity.
Did he ever consider running?
Not that I know of.
Interesting.
But think about it. It would have been, you have to do things in a campaign, and you have to position yourself in a campaign that may be very difficult for someone seeking that office. Whereas in an unfiltered position, a leadership that you can simply do the kind of things that you want to do, serving the people that you want to serve, and not have to be beholden to a political process in terms of time, monies, energy, schedules that evolved around a political process, may not have been something which he could have been very good at.
Well, many people would say that you've been very good at governing, and you're reaching the end of your political career. This past fall, not only did you announce that you're not going to run for any other elected office after your term ends in 2018, but a ballot referendum passed that would term limit you out in any case. So you are not running for elected office after the year 2018, which would then lead one to conclude that you have created a legacy. You have an entire almost 3 decades worth of public service in elected office. As we near the end of this podcast, my final question for you is if you would reflect on your years in public service and speak about what your legacy is. You mentioned how Martin Luther King inspired you. Perhaps you might tell our listeners about how you may or may not have, or how you may have inspired other individuals to seek to serve the public as you have, to follow in your footsteps. If you could just take a moment and reflect upon 3 decades of public service, a lifetime in trying to improve the world to the best of your abilities. Why did you do it? What is your legacy? who is Ike Leggett, and what has he done for Maryland Montgomery County?
Well, let's start by thinking about the challenges that you face. When I decided to run for office as county executive, it was based on my belief that the next leader for Montgomery County had to effectively manage change. And I think that we've done that. When you look at the county today, we've been able to manage that change by starting off with ensuring that we build a proper foundation and maintain that foundation. This county is a AAA bond-rated county. We have probably the highest financial reserves in the history of the county. We receive more awards across the board in terms of any county that you can name anywhere within this region and probably anywhere in the United States. We have prize-winning schools in Montgomery County, and we have a quality of life that is an envy of many around the world. And manage that change in a time of great stress, financial difficulties, government sequestration, reductions in budgets, and to maintain that and to have the quality of services that we have in Montgomery County has been an extraordinary job. Throughout this period of time, we have constructed and built probably 50 projects outside of schools that are major projects in Montgomery County. We've enhanced affordable housing. We've improved our school system. We've certainly improved quality of life in terms of the environment in Montgomery County. This is not to suggest that we do not have challenges in Montgomery County, but we've done so in a time when the county has changed. And so Ike Leggett has fashioned that change in a way that maintains the level of services and in many ways have significantly improved those in Montgomery County, whether it's from housing, for schools, for roads, the quality of life across the board has significantly improved. Now, when you look at the county today and my motivation was to make certain that we can in fact advance this county at a level that embraces that change. We're a much more recognized international community now. We have sister city business relationships literally across the board, and we've pushed that in a way that looks at places like India, China, South Korea, Brazil, Israel, across the board in Montgomery County. So our financial base and economic development and biotechnology now is one of the best in the entire country. I could go down the litany of all of those things, but Ike Leggett has effectively managed change to put Montgomery County in the 21st and move toward the 22nd century in a better position than I found it under some very difficult and stressful circumstances.
And that has been Ike Leggett, Montgomery County executive, former Montgomery County council member, who speaks about his lifetime of service as one that leaves a legacy of improving quality of life, of fiscal responsibility as a Democrat who has invested in Montgomery County public schools and sees public education as a vehicle for long-term economic development and sustaining a AAA bond rating, which is a great indicator of the fiscal responsibility that Mr. Leggett has had to pursue despite a great recession, that even in the most trying times, he's been able to maintain high quality of services. He's been able to take care of those in great need with affordable housing, has advanced a progressive agenda with protecting our environment, and yet has expanded the global impact of our community. Mr. Leggett is someone who takes his job seriously, but whose motivation is quite simple in the kernel of truth that each of us ought to, at the end of the day, attempt to leave the world a little bit better than we found it. Mr. Leggett, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And that has been episode 99 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.